Today we're diving into a fascinating and pretty wild historical mystery. It's a theory that claims our entire understanding of ancient history hasn't just been lost to time, it's been deliberately hidden from us.
So just think about this for a second. What if the timeline you learned in school is missing hundreds, even thousands of years? And what if they were removed on purpose? We're not talking about a scribe making a typo here. The claim is that this was a strategic, calculated redaction of history that changes, well, pretty much everything.
So where does this idea even come from? Well, the heart of the mystery is a major conflict between two of the most important ancient manuscripts of the Old Testament. You've got the Septuagint, which is the older Greek translation, and then you have the Masoretic text, the standard Hebrew version that most of our modern Bibles are based on. The problem? They tell two completely different stories about how much time has actually passed since creation. And listen, we're not talking about a few years here and there. This is a massive discrepancy. The Septuagint, the older of the two, lays out a much, much longer history. But the Masoretic text, which was put together centuries later, has a timeline that's significantly shorter. We're talking about centuries of time that just seem to have vanished into thin air. So the big question is, where did all that time go? This brings us to this central claim of this whole theory, that this isn't just an ancient error, it's actually the evidence of intentional tampering. The argument goes that scribes, sometime around the 2nd century AD, deliberately compressed the timeline. So, let's play detective for a minute and look at the evidence that's presented. Okay, so the first big clue actually comes from the New Testament. In the Gospel of Luke, when he's listing the genealogy of Jesus, he mentions a man named Canaan. Now, this one name, just tucked away in a long list, creates a huge problem for the standard timeline we use today. And here's why. If you go back to the older Septuagint text, in Genesis 11, the family tree is clear. Arphaxad is the father of Canaan, who is the father of Shelah. But when you look at the same passage in the later Masoretic text, Canaan is gone, just completely removed. Proponents of this theory say this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate deletion specifically designed to shorten the historical record. Now, if you thought a missing person was a big deal, the next piece of evidence is even bigger. It's something researchers call the Persian gap. This points to another huge chunk of history that seems to be dramatically shrunk down in the Masoretic text. This chart really puts it into perspective. I mean, wow. Independent historical records from Greek and Babylonian sources all agree that the Persian Empire lasted for about 210 years. But the timeline you get from the Masoretic text suggests it was only 52 years long. That means over 160 years of one of the world's most significant empires, seemingly just erased from the record. Okay, so this begs the most important question of all. Why? Why would anyone go to all this trouble to change the timeline? Well, if history really was altered, there had to be an incredibly powerful motive. And according to this theory, the motive was all about prophecy. It all comes down to a famous prophecy in the book of Daniel. You might have heard of it, the 70 weeks prophecy. You can think of it like a divine countdown clock, a 490-year timer that was widely believed to point to the exact moment in history when the Messiah was supposed to show up. And this right here is what the theory claims is the smoking gun. If you use the original, longer timeline from the Septuagint, that 490-year prophetic clock lands perfectly on 30 AD, right around the time of Jesus' crucifixion. But if you shrink the timeline by removing Canaan and compressing the Persian Empire, it completely shifts the prophecy's target date. Suddenly, it points to 132 AD, the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was a completely different messianic movement. The allegation is that the change was made specifically to prophetically disqualify Jesus as the Messiah. So, this is where it gets even more interesting. What happens if we just restore those missing years? What if we put the timeline back the way it was? According to this theory, when you do that, something incredible emerges. A hidden, mathematically perfect, and symmetric structure appears in history. And the key to unlocking this whole pattern is the number 70. It just keeps showing up over and over again, almost like a divine fingerprint or a rhythmic pulse that's been beating throughout all of history. This pattern supposedly begins with Adam himself. The idea here is that for his first 70 years, Adam wasn't living in time like we do. He was in a timeless state, a body of light. It was only after the fall that he began living in linear time, and he lived another 930 years.
You add those together, and you get a perfect 1,000 years, or what's called one divine day. This model suggests that all of humanity's 6,000 years of history is actually a kind of sentence imposed to pay back those initial 70 years of lost, timeless life. And this is what creates a perfect mirror, a chiasm, in history. You have the fall in 3855 BC, then the absolute center point, the judicial pivot of all of history, is the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, which, by the way, is exactly 70 years after the birth of Christ. And the perfect mirror image on the other side is a predicted restoration in the year 2070 AD. It creates this absolutely stunning, perfect symmetry. So, if all of human history is really a 6,000-year judicial sentence, what on earth happens when the time is up? This is where the theory gets to its mind-bending grand conclusion. To really get it, we have to look at one key word, kolasin. It's the Greek word often translated as hell or eternal punishment, but in this view, it doesn't mean infinite torture at all. It means a finite corrective process. Think of it less like an eternal fire and more like a restorative pruning, or even a prison sentence that has a very specific and final end date. So this 6,000-year sentence of mortality is structured in a very specific way. It's made up of 120 Jubilee cycles, with each one being 50 years long. And the theory goes that this whole period will end in what's called a grand Jubilee, the moment when the legal sentence for all of humanity officially expires. The implications of this are frankly staggering. At the final Jubilee, the 6,000-year debt is finally paid in full and canceled. The time of pruning, or kolasin, comes to an end. A universal amnesty is declared for everyone. And in the end, every single soul is restored to that original, timeless body of light state that Adam lost so long ago. The sentence is served, and all the captives are finally set free. And that really leaves us with this final, massive question to chew on. Whether you see this whole thing as a hidden truth being uncovered or just a fascinating alternative interpretation, the idea forces you to look at time itself in a totally new way. If history isn't just a random series of events, but a meticulously structured judicial sentence, then what does it truly mean for that sentence to finally and completely come to an end?